Micro Machine Man here presenting the genuine original, colossally collectible, most midget miniature replicas of the real things, Micro Machines.
They were smaller than a marble, smaller than a silver dollar, so tiny that a child could hold an entire fleet in one closed fist and carry a universe of imagination from room to room, class to class, and adventure to adventure. And yet, despite their scale, or rather because of it, Micro Machines became one of the most beloved and commercially dominant toy lines in the history of the industry. At their peak in the late 1980s and early 1990s, they didn't just compete with the giants of the die-cast vehicle world. They actually outsold them. For a few extraordinary years, the tiny cars from a California family company named Galoob were more popular than Hot Wheels. They were on school desks, in jacket pockets, scattered across living room carpets, and, after a fateful appearance in a 1990 blockbuster film, permanently embedded in the collective memory of an entire generation. And then, almost overnight, they were gone. Not gradually phased out, not quietly retired, just gone. Vanished from the shelves with a speed that seemed almost impossible given the scale of what had come before. The question that has fascinated collectors, toy historians, and nostalgic adults ever since is both simple and surprisingly complex. What actually happened? How did one of the biggest toy crazes of the 80s and 90s rise so high and fall so fast? The answer involves a brilliant underdog strategy, a genuinely iconic marketing campaign, the gravitational pull of a galaxy far, far away, a corporate acquisition driven by motivations that had very little to do with tiny cars, and the unstoppable tide of digital technology that changed what it meant to be a child with something to play with. This is the full story of Micro Machines, and it is as packed with detail as the toys themselves. The underdog strategy, going smaller to win bigger. By the mid-1980s, the die-cast vehicle toy market had settled into what seemed like a permanent duopoly. Hot Wheels and Matchbox dominated the shelves, the advertising budgets, and the imaginations of children across the world. They had been doing so for decades. Their distribution networks were vast, their brand recognition was essentially total, and their product lines were so established that competing with them on their own terms was considered commercially suicidal. No new entrant had managed to make a meaningful dent in their market share. The consensus in the industry was clear. The die-cast vehicle space was owned, and it was not available. But Galoob, a California-based family company, had been watching this landscape and arriving at a different conclusion. Rather than competing with Hot Wheels and Matchbox on their existing terms, same scale, same price point, same retail positioning, Galoob decided to reframe the entire category. Two inventors brought them the idea of ultra-miniature, highly detailed vehicles that could be sold in multi-packs for just a few dollars. The insight was elegant in its simplicity. If you couldn't beat the giants at their own game, you changed the game entirely. You went smaller, much, much smaller, and you made the smallness itself the feature rather than the limitation. The cars were so tiny, kids could hold entire collections in one hand, and yet, despite their size, the detail was incredible. Paint jobs, molded features, tiny aircraft wings, and miniature tanks that looked like they came straight from a real-world catalog. The craftsman packed into something barely larger than a thumbnail was a genuine engineering achievement, and children recognized it immediately. The tactile experience of holding something so small but so perfectly rendered, so complete in its own miniature world, was unlike anything else on the market. And crucially, the price point changed the entire purchasing dynamic. When you could buy a multi-pack of vehicles for a few dollars, you weren't buying one toy. You were buying a fleet, a collection, a world. The strategy worked instantly. Kids were obsessed with the portability and the low price. Parents loved the value. And soon Micro Machines were everywhere, on school desks, in backpacks, and scattered across the living room carpets of homes across America. The brand had found a gap in the market that nobody else had identified, and they had built something entirely new inside it. The underdog had entered the ring and landed a punch that the giants hadn't seen coming. The voice that sold a generation. Great products create markets. Great marketing creates phenomena. And the marketing campaign that transformed Micro Machines from a successful toy line into a genuine cultural institution was, by any measure, one of the most creatively inspired campaigns in the history of toy advertising. It centered on a single performer, a single gimmick, and a single tagline, and all three were executed with a precision and energy that made them not just effective, but genuinely unforgettable. The performer was John Machida Jr., The Guinness World Record recognized fastest talking man alive. Galoob's decision to hire Machida as the face of their television commercials was one of the greatest marketing moves in toy history. The logic was almost too perfect. A toy line built around the concept of astonishing amounts of detail packed into an impossibly small space, advertised by a man who could pack an astonishing number of words into an impossibly short time. Machida blasted through the features of each playset at lightning speed, giving the commercials a frantic, high-energy style that matched the brand perfectly. They were unforgettable, funny, chaotic, and packed with information. The commercials established the Micro Machines man as a character in his own right, a fast-talking, endlessly enthusiastic pitchman who seemed genuinely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of things he needed to tell you about. Micro Machines are less gargantuan than a grasshopper, as small as a marble, and smaller than a silver dollar. The rhythm and the energy of these spots were unlike anything else on children's television at the time. And they always, without exception, ended with the same line, delivered at full speed, with complete conviction. If it doesn't say Micro Machines, it's not the real thing. That tagline became one of the most recognized phrases in 1980s and 1990s toy advertising. It was repeated in playgrounds and classrooms. It became a shorthand for authenticity, for quality, for the real experience versus the imitation. The ads became part of the brand's identity and helped propel the toy line to massive heights. By 1989, Micro Machines alone were generating around $135 million in annual sales, an extraordinary figure for a company of Galoob's size, and a testament to the combined power of a brilliant product concept and a marketing campaign that had become genuinely culturally embedded. Home Alone in the moment of peak ubiquity. If the Machida commercials made Micro Machines famous, a single scene in a 1990 film made them legendary. When Home Alone became one of the highest-grossing movies of the year, one of the highest-grossing comedies in Hollywood history, it brought with it a scene that burned itself into the memory of every child who watched it. Tevin McAllister, defending his house against two hapless burglars, scattered a handful of tiny toy cars across the kitchen floor. What followed was a slapstick masterpiece of pain and chaos. And every single child watching instantly recognized those cars. They were practically a universal childhood experience at that point. The Micro Machines didn't need a product placement deal to benefit from the moment. They were already ubiquitous enough that their appearance felt like a natural feature of a child's world. Because for millions of children, it was. The Home Alone moment captured something important about what Micro Machines had achieved by the turn of the decade. They were no longer just a toy line. They were a fact of childhood, as unremarkable and as essential as crayons or bicycles. The brand had crossed the threshold from commercial product to cultural object, and that transition carried with it a kind of permanence that no advertising campaign could manufacture. You can buy awareness, you can buy recognition, but you cannot buy the moment when a toy becomes part of how a generation experiences being young. Playsets, licensing, and Star Wars. With a secure foundation of commercial success and cultural recognition, Galoob moved aggressively to expand the Micro Machines universe in every direction available to them. The product line, that had begun with ultra-miniature vehicles, grew into an entire ecosystem of play experiences, each one extending the core promise of the brand, astonishing detail and imagination in an impossibly compact form, into new territories. The transforming playsets were a particular triumph of creative engineering. Kids could open a toolbox to reveal a full working garage, unfold a van into a bustling city, or pop open cases that transformed into racetracks, construction yards, and military bases. These sets were portable, imaginative, and brilliantly engineered, physical puzzles that rewarded the children who discovered their secrets with entire worlds hidden inside everyday objects. The concept perfectly extended the brand's founding idea that the most extraordinary things come in the smallest packages. Galoob also expanded the Micro Machines universe into monster trucks, police fleets, boats, jets, and tanks. They introduced color-changing vehicles, and one of the most creative product lines in toy history, the Insiders, where a Micro Machine vehicle could be opened to reveal an even tinier version concealed inside. a miniature within a miniature. A Russian nesting doll logic applied to the die-cast vehicle concept. It was exactly the kind of playful, self-referential creativity that had defined the brand from the beginning. But the biggest leap forward came through licensing. Galoob secured agreements with some of the most commercially powerful entertainment franchises in the world, including Star Trek, James Bond, and the one that truly detonated, Star Wars. The Star Wars Micro Machines line became wildly popular almost immediately. For many fans, particularly those who had grown up with the original trilogy and were now watching their own children discover it, these sets represented something genuinely exciting. The first time you could own palm-sized versions of the Millennium Falcon, X-Wing fighters, TIE fighters, and Star Destroyers. The sets let kids reenact massive movie battles on tabletops and bedroom floors, collapsing the scale of an entire galaxy into the space of a kitchen table. Micro Machines even extended their reach into video games. The Micro Machines game series, developed by Codemasters, placed players on racing tracks built across domestic environments, breakfast tables, bathtubs, pool tables, and school desks. The top-down racing formula was chaotic, fast-paced, and beloved, perfectly capturing the spirit of the toy line in an interactive format. The games were commercially successful and critically well-received, and they introduced the Micro Machines brand to an audience that might never have encountered the physical toys. By the mid-90s, Micro Machines had achieved something remarkable. They were a genuine multimedia franchise, present in toy aisles, on television, in cinemas, and on game consoles simultaneously. The cracks appear, brand dilution, and a shifting world. But beneath the surface of this expansion, the conditions that would eventually destroy the brand were already forming. The downfall wasn't caused by one single issue. It was a combination of several, all hitting around the same time. And the first of those problems was one that the brand had, in a very real sense, created for itself. The speed and ambition with which Galoob had expanded Micro Machines across licensing deals, product categories, and media platforms had generated enormous revenue. But it had also begun to erode the thing that had made the brand powerful in the first place: its identity. Micro Machines grew so quickly and branched into so many themes that the line began to lose focus. With sets covering everything from military battles to futuristic racing to licensed movie ships, the brand started to feel scattered. And in some cases, the licensed franchises, especially Star Wars, overshadowed the Micro Machines logo entirely, weakening the brand identity that had made them so powerful in the first place. Children and parents buying Star Wars sets were buying Star Wars. The fact that the sets were made by Galoob and carried the Micro Machines logo was incidental. The gravitational pull of a licensed franchise had grown so strong that it was pulling the brand identity out of orbit. At the same time, the broader toy industry was undergoing a transformation that no amount of clever product development or creative licensing could reverse. How a corporate deal sealed the fate of a brand. The final and decisive blow came not from the marketplace, but from the boardroom. In 1998, Hasbro purchased Galoob for approximately $220 million. It was a significant acquisition, and to most observers at the time, the motivation was transparent. Hasbro's primary interest was not in the Micro Machines brand, the transforming playsets, the insiders, or the legacy of the Machita commercials. Their primary interest was in the Star Wars license that Galoob controlled, one of the most commercially valuable entertainment properties on the planet, and one that Hasbro very much wanted in its own portfolio. Most analysts at the time agreed that Hasbro's main motivation was securing the valuable Star Wars license that Galoob controlled. Once Hasbro owned the rights, Star Wars toys were folded into Hasbro's existing operations. The licensing deal that had been Micro Machines' greatest commercial triumph was now Hasbro's property, absorbed into a much larger corporate machine that had its own established priorities, its own core brands, and its own ideas about where to direct its resources. Micro Machines, now without the licensing star power and without a dedicated team driving them, were no longer a priority. Hasbro shifted focus to its core brands: Transformers, Graham's I. Joe, and Nerf. Properties with deeper roots in the company's own history and stronger positions in the contemporary market. New Micro Machines releases slowed to a trickle. The product development pipeline that had once generated transforming playsets, insider vehicles, and licensed franchise sets dried up. By the early 2400, the once mighty brand had all but disappeared from the shelves. For many kids who had grown up with them, it felt as though they had vanished overnight, as suddenly and completely as the tiny cars themselves, which had a way of rolling behind sofas and under refrigerators, never to be seen again. The revivals, close but never quite there. The story of Micro Machines does not end with the Hasbro acquisition, though the chapters that follow are largely defined by the difficulty of recapturing what had been lost. Over the years following the brand's effective disappearance, multiple attempts were made to revive the franchise, each one arriving with genuine hope and departing with limited results. An early 2000s reboot came and went quickly, generating little traction in a market that had moved on. In 2015, the line briefly returned with new Star Wars sets tied to the release of The Force Awakens, a logical moment to attempt a revival, given the unprecedented cultural appetite for Star Wars content generated by the sequel trilogy's launch. But despite the timing and the license, the new sets again faded shortly after their initial appearance, unable to establish the kind of sustained commercial momentum that would have justified continued investment. In 2020, the most ambitious revival effort to date launched under Wicked Cool Toys, a company later acquired by Jazzwares. This reboot brought back classic themes, updated vehicle designs, and new playsets, including a modern reimagining of the legendary Super Van City, one of the most iconic playsets from the brand's original era. The reception was mixed but genuine. Some collectors praised the return, calling the new line the closest thing to the original in decades. Others criticized the lack of licensed real-world vehicles, the specific makes and models that had given the original Micro Machines their documentary authenticity. The sense that you were holding a real Lamborghini or Trans Am in miniature, and felt the magic wasn't fully recaptured. The revival story illustrates a problem that afflicts many nostalgia-driven brand revivals. The original product was not just a collection of features that could be reproduced and relaunched. It was a convergence of product innovation, marketing genius, cultural timing, and specific childhood context that cannot be manufactured after the fact. The Micro Machines of the 1980s and 1990s existed in a world without smartphones, without streaming video, without the infinite entertainment options available to children today. They filled a particular space in children's lives, a space that no longer exists in the same form. Reviving the toy without reviving the context is, inevitably, an exercise in diminishing returns. Miniature time capsules of a generation. Today, Micro Machines live on primarily as a nostalgia brand, cherished by collectors who seek out original sets, celebrated on social media by adults who grew up with them, and studied as a case study in both the heights of toy industry success and the vulnerabilities that even the most dominant brands carry within their own growth strategies. The original Micro Machines are now highly collectible, commanding prices that would have astonished the children who once dropped them between sofa cushions and forgot about them. They have become, in the most literal sense, miniature time capsules of a generation's childhood. The rise and fall of Micro Machines is a classic underdog story. A small family company outsmarted the biggest players in the industry through creativity, scale, price, and one of the most iconic advertising campaigns ever filmed. Galoob had built something genuinely revolutionary, a product concept so elegant in its simplicity and so perfectly executed in its detail that it created an entirely new category of play. They had hired John Machida Jr. and created a marketing campaign so distinctive that it became a cultural artifact in its own right. They had secured the Star Wars license and used it to extend their brand into one of the most commercially powerful franchises in entertainment history. And for a period, they had achieved the seemingly impossible. They had made children forget about hot heels. The fall came from a mix of brand illusion, shifting childhood interests, and a corporate acquisition where they simply became low priority. It is a story that contains lessons that extend well beyond the toy industry, about the dangers of expanding so rapidly that you dilute the identity that made you distinctive, about the importance of creative ownership and institutional commitment, about what happens when a brand built by passionate specialists is absorbed into a corporation whose priorities lie elsewhere, and about the fundamental impossibility of building a sustainable franchise on the strength of a single licensing relationship, however powerful. But none of that diminishes what Micro Machines actually achieved. They remind us of a time when a whole universe of imagination could fit in your pocket, and when a fast-talking pitchman could convince millions of kids that if it didn't say Micro Machines, it wasn't the real thing. The original sets that survived, still crisp in their paint, still impossibly detailed for their scale, carry within them something that no digital entertainment product can replicate: the specific weight and texture of a particular kind of childhood wonder. The wonder of holding something very small in your hand and finding, inside it, something very large. They were tiny. They were everywhere. And for a few incredible years, they were the biggest thing in the toy industry. That is not a small legacy. That is, in fact, the real thing.